Hey, David. Thanks for
Oh,
joining me.
great to be here with you, Julia.
Good morning.
Good
Uh,
morning.
so as you know, I've been doing this sort of, I guess it's like a interview series slash discussion dialogue series about LACE, which is an acronym. I think you know what it stands for because you made it up. Lightweight AI Computing Ecosystem.
I'm guilty as charged.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it because it's so visual, right? It brings out exactly what it is. Uh, all these nodes laced together. And so just we're talking about, it's a hodgepodge of people from for-profits, nonprofits, um, not just in the group where we met, which was Lightroot, but also around the world. There's just other organizations who are working on this. So we're talking about kind of the big questions, the policy questions, which I think is where your background really shines, but also the emotional social questions, which also your background also shines there. And I kind of want to talk about all of them. And then there's the world piece. So in the initial essay, I talked about wisdom, openness, resilience, love, and diversity. And by the end of the interview or dialogue, I would love to figure out which one of those most resonates with you as something you want to weave into what you think is necessary. So where do you want to begin?
Well, I think you gave a really great framework, which is this is something that involves not just different technologies, including the different flavors and methodologies of AI and the different phenomenologies as we know them and then are discovering around quantum computing. uh, there's also then the second realm of the policy questions, which I appreciate you gave me a hat tip. I always find fascinating that people do say I do policy when I'm intentionally nonpartisan and non-political, which I find sort of like this paradox.
Oh, but I
But I
think of
agree.
policy
Yeah.
as non-political. Do you
Oh, I
think?
agree. I agree. No, I
Yeah,
100%.
yeah,
I'm with you 100%. And we
yeah,
need more non-partisan policy making. I
a
find that
hundred
we've actually
percent.
gone we've gone almost too far in the other direction where everything is political nowadays. And I'm like, oh, you know, if everyone could anyone be born at the wrong time, I guess I'm born at the wrong time because I don't do politics. But anyway, I raise that because I guess I feel sometimes like I'm swimming upstream and the current is pushing me back. And then the last thing you mentioned was yeah that we need to think about what's needed for communities pluralistic that have different needs. How do we approach that with empathy and understanding? And again, this is one where I mean, you've done a lot, Julia. I know several other folks have. I consider myself fortunate to have worked with the People-Centered Internet Coalition, but other activities as well, because it does seem, again, we're in a world in which, at least in the United States, I don't want to speak for other nations, but I think some other nations are trending this way. We've become so hyper individualistic that we have forgotten the connectedness that we have both within our local regions, but also within our countries, but also across countries. And so if that's another area where I think both you and I are swimming, but I think if we tackle those three issues,
Yeah.
I think that'll give people a nice framing of what we're trying to do.
Okay. So do you want to start with how everything's become political?
Maybe I'll do the technology first because that's easier, and then we can get to the second question. Yes, give me a little moment before I jump on that hot potato. And so, it was interesting because I was actually with some of the folks that are part of this group this morning, and I don't want to, I want to keep it high level and not necessarily, but it was interesting because, you know, there's a very real risk that quantum becomes the next buzzword du jour next
Yeah.
year or the year after. And we've seen there was blockchain, and then unfortunately I never got on the blockchain train, but there was that. And now it's AI, even though AI has been around for a while. And when people say AI, they're really meaning generative AI, the current flavor. And so it's just sort of like unpacking that. And now quantum seems to be coming. And I think if there's anything you and I strive for together, it's about more pragmatic approaches that are not too hypey, but also not too laissez-faire or doomsdayism, because there's also that. And I would say,
Yeah.
the good news is people are becoming more familiar with quantum phenomenologies, is probably the best way to put it, because quantum computing is just one presentation. There's also quantum sensors, there's other things that, quantum key distribution, things like that. I think the challenge we have is unlike, say, things that humans thought they had a good grasp of, and then they started to build, like for example, computers, or they built things with it, or we started to have a
Right.
good sense of what was possible with nanotubes and quantum manufacturing, and so there was quantum materials and carbon materials. Quantum we're still trying to understand the phenomenology as we're trying to also employ it. And I'm not
Yes,
saying,
yes. In fact, the phenomenology itself is going to teach us things. Once
yes,
as so it's a little different from building a computer where you're like, I know what this resistor will do, I know what this capacitor will do. Right?
yes. Yeah,
Right.
and it kind of reminds me of, you know, I want to even go back even to the days of, like, Charles Babbage and his, like, differential, difference engine. Like,
Engine.
they,
Yeah.
they they were trying to use mechanical gears
Yeah.
for what eventually would be replaced with, vacuum tubes, followed by actual, like, actual electrical resistors and diodes and things like that. So, in some respects, we are trying to, when people talk about what quantum computing will be able to do, I always tell them to pause. As we currently understand the phenomenology, we may discover other things along the way that completely short circuit that, or things like that. And so this is, I think it's what I would recommend for folks is, if you meet anyone who's absolutely certain that quantum is going to do X, Y, Z, be a little guarded. you know?
Honestly, I think that applies to any technology.
Probably true. Yes, that is probably, but even more so here, where we are, probably the best equivalent to this is also what's possible in the realm of bio and personalized medicine. Like, the amount of stuff that we don't know about bio outsizes the amount of things we do know. Now, we do know a lot of things, and we're getting increasingly intelligent about it, but a little bit of humility will go a long way. Same thing for quantum. Anyone who tells you that the quantum future is going to be this in 10 years, maybe. And one of the things I was sort of recommending this morning when I was having a different conversation is outline possible contours of what's possible, but recognize they are simply contours. We don't have enough information to be able to fill in the spaces. However, I do think what I celebrate what's happening with Lace is thinking about what can be said openly, which is different than some other efforts that are not open, to what can be done to think globally, not tied to a specific ideology. Now, I
Right.
think you and I are on the side of, we value individual freedoms, individual choice, that we value human lives, and that people
Pro
should have
democracy, pro
dignity.
freedom.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And so, we have that slant, and we need to be mindful that there are actors that may not, and again, I don't fault them, they may not necessarily have the same value set, but we don't necessarily resonate with that. Or they're actors that are completely selfish, that are hyper individualistic to the point of, it's criminal, or it's syndicates or things like that, where they don't feel the same emotional response you and I might do to misuse or abuse or harming people.
Well, and
And
this
so,
goes back. Well,
yeah,
so
go ahead.
actually, can I interject
Of
in
course,
here?
please.
It reminds me of, so back to the importance of contours, finding the edges. So in the world of edge science, the reason why I like to call the sort of more controversial leading edge science is that it is about finding what the contours are of this space. The contours actually end up defining the space. So it's not like extra.
Right.
It's actually definitory, right? And so figuring out what the contours are actually tells you, like asking like when you use the word phenomenology a lot when you're talking about quantum computing. What's interesting to me about that, I get it. You're using it in the understanding of this phenomenon, right? So there's almost like the science of understanding this phenomenon of quantum computing. In the world of psychology, consciousness research, phenomenology means subjective experience. And in fact, it is the biggest mystery in consciousness, right? How do we have subjective experience at all, right? There's the hard problem. How does the brain turn into the mind, right? Or vice versa, or whatever. They both emerge from something, who knows? Uh, but one of the big questions for me about the contours of quantum computing is this very question. Will it, and I'm kind of an empirical person, so whenever it says, will something happen, I say, well, it's an empirical question. Let's see. But will it create something that has an inner experience, that has phenomenology in the psychological sense, in the subjective sense? And the reason why that matters to me and why I think that should matter to everyone is the same reason why I think that matters when you build something like an emergent mind, like a lace, right? Which is really a bunch of AIs talking to each other. You can kind of imagine that they're like neurons, right? And you can kind of imagine a mind emerging from that. And so here are these two technologies that might create some kind of an emergent mind, and it could potentially have subjective experience because we don't understand subjective experience. So do we think of it as an individual So you and I, individualism. So I'm always very careful because not always very careful, but in the conversation about individuality versus sort of self-transcendence, I think that people can get stuck at this idea of self-transcendence is always better, and I preach self-transcendence a lot. But without acknowledgement of the importance of the individual, you could easily just create slaves, right, of humans and
Mhm.
potentially of minds that aren't human minds. So anyway, where my mind goes with this is, what do you think of that boundary?
Sure. So let me tie together what you said with three quick points. So first, I love that you used the word edge, and you talked about it, what edge means in the psychology sense, because as you know, there's a lot of empirical understanding that the way the brain helps with visual processing is it starts with the edges. In fact, like early on, infants, not just infant humans, but infant mammals, if they come to an edge, they generally stop. And that's that's probably because those ancestors who didn't stop, unfortunately, probably passed away because they went over the edge and it was harmful and whatever it is. And so edge detection is in some respects almost primal to our existence because it sets conditions for something there might be dangerous or might be harmful, may not, might be an opportunity too, but it's a stopping point. And so edges are useful from that. And then you raise the question about as we begin to understand the actual quantum phenomenology, will that change our phenomenology and our understanding of the of subjective experiences, how we make sense of the world? And again, I'm a very empirical scientist, for better or for worse. I'm also a post-positivist, so I believe that you can never get to absolute truths, but you can do enough scientific experiments to begin to understand and begin to correlate. So, um, as you know, there's some recent research that there may actually be there. It's not definitive, but there's indications that there may actually be some quantum processes happening in the human brain. And of course, if that happens, a whole lot of things change. One, this whole belief that we have to have things really cold and really things like that, that we can't do things at, the brain temperature is completely wrong. And that's why I tell people, be ready for quantum computing to be rethought if we discover that it is actually happening in a warm, messy, chaotic environment
Well,
like
it's
our brain.
happening in photosynthesis already, so it doesn't even need
Exactly.
to happen in human brain.
Right. And I remember when people said, "Oh no, there's we already understand photosynthesis." Well, maybe we don't. And we do believe that there's actually some birds that actually navigate using
That's right.
quantum. It's not just magnetic fields.
Yeah.
So again, I think again, approaching things with a humbleness that there's things we don't know yet is very helpful here. However, if there are quantum processes happening in the brain, then everyone who thinks that AGI is just around the corner, which I'm not one of them, will have to rethink things because they're assuming mechanistic things going on with the neurons at classical levels as opposed to quantum, because quantum then adds a whole level of complexity that that again, I don't think AGI is going to show up in 6 months. I could be completely wrong, and I will own that. But
It would be
I
like
think
adding
that
multiple
raises
dimensions to the analysis
yes,
that weren't even considered before. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
So I think that gets very interesting. And then the last thing I would say is you asked a very good question about the tension between I versus we is the way I'll phrase it. And yes, I mean, it's worth noting like our bodies are more than 50% not us. They're microbes and things like that. And that's just our bodies. And so who am I? Am I David, the cells whose DNA is David and everything else is not me? Well, no, I don't think I could operate without everything else there. But then if you think about the planet, not only are there 8.1, give or take, human beings on the planet, but there are way more plants, microbes, there are way more, insects, way more than there are of us. And so I do think that lens of I and we are is an interesting lens to have. I will come back to, and I agree, I'm with you 100%. We need to think about the broader whole. I can remember as a young child, um, youngish, I guess I was like in my 10 or 11, just being amazed at how so many events were probably happening simultaneously in the planet
Yeah.
on the planet, and
Yeah.
just feeling like basically right now, probably any possible experience one could have, someone is probably multiple people are probably having right now.
Yeah. More than one. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I think the value of at least having some sense of what is in your scope not only helps prevent, like you said, loss of freedom, slavery, things like that. There's also increasingly, I think, an epidemic of learned helplessness at the
Mhm.
moment. where
Mhm.
people are like, that's too big. I can't possibly tackle it. I can't do anything. I'm going to leave that for either the government or business.
Or they
And
say it'll never change. Like that'll,
right, it'll never
people will
change.
always be like that. And that's always my red flag. Like, oh, really?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. One, I mean, I'm usually when anyone does anything absolutist, I'm like, things are rarely absolute. And then two, like you said, like the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, and you may only be a few steps on that collective journey, but others will be on that journey as well. And so I think you're absolutely right. I think we do need to find a balance because in some respects I'm leaping ahead to the third point, and we'll circle back to the hard one about how too many things have gotten political nowadays. But
Yeah, yeah.
the third point about the need for community-centered activities with LACE around quantum, around emerging technologies is because a future that is solely individualistic, it's in some respects inhuman. We humans are a combination of individual creatures, but also collective creatures. We are social creatures. And so I think the question is I celebrate that we are 8.1 billion people on the planet, which has never been that way before. How do we continue that in terms of healthy coexistence and most importantly, coexistence? And that to me is again, I mean, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing is to not be able to help contribute to that we may end up with a very dystopian future in 10 to 15 years.
For anyone to not be able to contribute, for any group of
Exactly.
people to not be able to contribute, right? So anyone who's sort of left out. And so as we have this, of course, we have antipathies between different countries and different sectors and different humans, right? And even some antipathy towards certain animals. Like I don't really like mosquitoes, for instance, but you
Sharks
know,
are
the
my favorite creatures. I don't know if I want to be too close and cuddle one. Just saying.
right, exactly. So and so those antipathies are real and very human. And I think we're entering a time, I believe we're entering a time when we're learning, like the key task is to learn how to notice the antipathy and to manage it. And to say, yeah, this is a human thing to have this antipathy. And how are we going to manage it? It's not, instead of falling for it like it's the truth, acknowledging it like this is a human behavior. Like almost like you would with a kid. Like, of course, the kid doesn't want to share their new toy,
Right. Right.
right? And so, how do you manage that?
So now you got me thinking. This is where the preacher's kid part of me, even though I'm not that.
Preach,
There's a
David,
phrase.
preach.
Well, what I saw was through a glass darkly. The quote that basically, I used to see things as a child, and now I put childish things away.
Yeah.
Um, that maybe that's what humanity is always struggling with. Is
Yes.
in some respects we have tendencies, both genetic, mimetic, cultural, and the like, to revert back to individual tribalistic manners. I mean, I jokingly say, but it's only half jokingly, that the seven deadly sins were evolutionary advantages for individuals 10,000 years ago. Now, I'm not advocating one pursue the seven deadly sins, but
Yeah.
there's a reason why we no longer consider those things conducive to coexistence within a peaceful society.
Mm.
And we have to find ways of almost updating the operating system that is us, through narratives, through memes and things like that. It's not perfect, and organized religion can be misused just as any type of organized structure, corporate, governmental, or whatever can be misused. And that gets now I will tackle that second point that we were talking about. So we talked about the
Wait,
tech.
before we go
Go,
there,
go ahead. Yes, yes, go ahead.
we have to take a breath because all of these things are very near and dear to both of our hearts. As a you're the preacher's child, I'll be the wannabe rabbi. As the
There you
wannabe
go.
rabbi,
Nice. Now we can be intersexual. That is good. Interfaith. That's good. Excellent.
yeah, yeah, intersexual, also maybe secular,
Secular.
intersex.
Freudian. What?
What? Um, yeah, but as the wannabe rabbi, um, there's this idea that we're all trying our best and we're all always going to be flawed and we
Yep.
still always have to try. And like, we're never going to get to the land of milk and honey. We're always going to be able to see it from the hill and be like, oh, look, it's down there. There's milk and honey and everyone's got a fig tree. Never going to get there.
Yep.
And some people find that depressing. And it's funny because you and I were just talking about how we don't like absolutism. So when people say, oh, people will never be like that, I'm always like, no. But if the like that is perfect, then I think that is really true. That's another absolutism. People, I don't think that that perfection is real. It's perfection is like a snapshot and reality is temporal, right? Our
100%.
experience of reality is temporal, dynamic, and that's part of being alive. So anyway, so that was my little rabbi wannabe statement. Okay, let's go politics.
Oh yeah, actually, no, real quick, I'll do it. Then we'll tackle it. Yeah, I agree
Okay,
with you wholeheartedly that yes, that thinking things have to be perfect is itself another source of absolutism that can
yeah,
be a source of tyranny.
yeah,
And I would
yeah,
actually say the friends that I consider my deepest friends, and I celebrate getting to know you too, Julia, are the friends that have recognized that life is not a straight line.
yeah,
I mean, I can remember early on, high school and college, and then even after college, there were people that like they knew they were going to do A, B, C, and D, and I was like, all right.
I
I'm
know.
going to be of service. I'm going to help where I can, and I even had like a college advisor who's like, well, you need to have a plan. I'm like, I'm going to aim for that star for the next 2 or 3 years, and then I'm going to adapt, and I'm okay with that. I mean, I know what I generally want to have as my legacy when I pass away, which is he strived to help where he could with his abilities, and tried to find those places. But it's much more in my mind. Life is well, again, I can't claim this. Life is what happens when you're making other plans. Like you can have some intentionality, but the universe is going to sure show you that you are part of a Brownian system.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I when I run into especially young people who are like, this is my plan, and I'm like, that's great. Let's see what
Yeah,
happens.
exactly. Let's see what happens. It's kind of like a quantum experiment.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's your plan. That's cool. You're a
So anyway,
photon.
so now tackling number two. So yeah, we talked about tech. We talked about the need to balance I and we, communities, individual freedoms, etc. I think for whatever reason, I would say there's two possible reasons. These are just two possible reasons. One, there hasn't been a large enough experience in the world of recent memory, the most recent being probably World War II, that brought people together in a way that said, look, we may have differences on how we see the world, how we want to interact with the world, our own belief systems, but we don't want another one of those things to happen. And sadly, the people that were veterans from World War II, both actually serving in military, but people who were in the auxiliary, women's auxiliary, and things like that, they are passing away, and so their memories are being lost. And so, you can see this is not just a U.S. phenomenon. It's actually a lot of Western nations, New Zealand, Sweden, Canada, UK. Not only is there increasingly decline in trust that actually more and more younger generations have less trust in society and less trust in the current system, but it's also then the responses of political figures to become almost hyper political, hyper extreme. It's almost like they feel like the ground is being lost underneath their feet, and so their response is to become even more political as opposed to trying
Clamp
to.
down.
Yeah, exactly. It's control. I mean,
Yeah,
I saw this when um, I mean, I was involved in response to 9/11, but then also when the anthrax events happened, and the anthrax events happened, less than 3.5 weeks after 9/11, I saw some senior leaders, their response was to clamp down with control and go to people who they knew as opposed to people that had practiced and had built relationships to respond to bad days like this.
yeah,
And that's what motivated me to get my PhD, which was top-down approaches fail in an increasingly turbulent environment.
yeah,
Um, Now, I'm not saying we don't need any form of governance, because I also believe without governance, sadly, humans tend to fall to some form of might makes right,
yeah,
and that's not always the case. But I am thinking that we need to find a balance between things that, yes, we still need to elect our leaders, we still need to have representative society, but there should be some places where things can be moved forward on the basis of the country, in our case, the country's constitution, as opposed to the country's current political party in charge.
yep. Amen. So,
But I'm crazy like that, and I get shot at from I get flack thrown my sometimes they call on me, and sometimes they kick me out the window. So,
Well, but that's okay. So, I mean, that should be expected,
mhm.
right? I mean, it's actually that's appropriate. And if you if the dominant sort of position is you got to choose sides and you don't choose sides, then but you have something of value to offer,
Yep,
right? You will have exactly the experience you're having.
yep. And I
So,
have to be okay with that.
yeah,
Exactly. It's like
you
I
better be
got
okay with
what
it.
I deserve.
Yeah, it's
Exactly.
kind of like what the deal is. Um, yeah, and honestly, that brings us exactly to this question about lace and the world values. So we're talking about, I mean, although we're talking about all these issues, right? Because the fact is that by thinking about peer-to-peer decentralized intelligences, we're thinking about human interaction, right? That humans are peer-to-peer decentralized
Yep.
intelligences,
Right.
right? Who have this loose government that compared to what we could do between us with our neighbors, for instance, when we're digging out of a snowstorm or something, is kind of minimal in terms of the overlay of government, really. And we think of it as a big thing, but if for most of the developed world, it's really not for non-autocratic systems. So how could we imitate democracy in peer-to-peer decentralized network? Which of those five values, so wisdom, openness, resilience, love, and diversity, or something else. Um, which of those five world values, first of all, if you had to pick, do you
Uh,
think is most essential? I'm going to make you pick. And then you're an acronym genius. So what other acronym would you put with world to include other
mhm.
other values that we're missing?
Well, so if I had to pick of those, the one I would value the most is diversity. Diversity of thought, diversity of perspective, and I think that actually is the the historians will look back at at this moment, 2020, and even the things leading up to 2020 and beyond. The question for the future is, can humans overcome some of our initial resistance to folks who think differently than us?
Yeah,
And in a rapidly changing world in which technology is super empowering individuals and groups to do certain things, continue to coexist with the diversity of human belief systems? I hope yes. You know, if that's the side I mean, that's the side I'm on. I hope yes. However, uh, that is an open-ended question, and I
it's an
think the
empirical
reason why
question. Yeah,
it's an empirical question, and it'll be and if anything, it's an always ongoing experiment. You know, there have been times in human history where, at least at the regional level, diversity perspectives did not win out, and people were subjugated and things like that. And we still have some injustices and things that we need to correct about our present, as well. However, I think if the ongoing push is the side that says civilization is when you don't automatically kill the newcomer, or the new idea. And so I would argue that civilization rests on the bedrock of, you know, you cannot be dictatorial, you cannot be absolutist, you cannot be insisting on my ideology versus someone else's ideology, because even those who intend this well, I mean, Plato wrote this in the Republic, you know, even a benevolent philosopher king would probably be killed when he or she tried to tell everyone what to do.
right.
And so I think with going back to why lace and why it matters and why diversity is so important, is it's recognizing we're going into a world where there's going to be, as a combination of both advances in AI technologies, advances in quantum technologies, advances even in Internet of Things and sensor technologies, and understanding with ubiquitous computing what's going on. There will be things that are completely foreign to our human evolutionary experience, yet we still want to value both the human as an individual choice actor
Yeah,
and human communities as choice actors.
that's right.
And how do we put in place protocols? And I really do think of this as protocols in which machines can interact with machines, machines can interact with people, people can interact with other people and group and machines in a way that is net uplifting. And again, recognizing there may be some humans, for whatever reason, want to use it to misuse, abuse, or harm society. Ideally, not amplifying that. I mean, even human speech, like, and one might even argue human speech is a protocol. You say something, I say something, we talk. I mean,
It's
there's
both
human
a
speech.
choice and a protocol.
100%.
No,
Human speech can be used for harmful purposes. In fact, I
no.
mean, even in representative democracies, representative republics like our own, free speech is, the government cannot limit your speech, but if you start doing hateful speech or harmful speech or things like that, private entities can respond or things like that. So it's a delicate balance between, yes, we want to celebrate your freedoms, and at the same time, we're trying to do net uplifting of civilization and societies as a whole.
Yes. So you think that diversity, just to, um, I want to kind of cover a point that I think you implied but didn't state.
Mhm.
You think that with diversity comes the necessity for, so because you need diversity of thought and experience. And because of that diversity, you need an array of choices that are localized to the actual diverse agents,
Yes.
correct? And that by localizing those choices, so you're not sort of outsourcing them to some sort of larger entity, by localizing that choice, one example is speech for humans, but with a peer-to-peer communication, that would be a protocol, right? Um, by localizing those choices, you're actually strengthening the system. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And again, I want to make it very clear that when I talk about choices and choice architectures, I am definitely not in the camp of, there's a camp that did, they talk about economic nudges and economic paternalism. I am definitely not that, where
Yeah, I
I'm not
really don't
saying
like that stuff. Yeah,
I don't like that stuff at all. And I want to call that out because I want to be
yeah,
very intentional. I am not assuming I know what's best for people, but
yeah,
I want to give them an array of choices consistent with, if anything, if you know John Rawls's veil of ignorance, like I don't know who I'm going to be born into this world yet. I don't know if I'm going to be born to the United States or outside the United States. I don't know if I'm going to be in a family that's well off or not well off. I don't know if I'm
right,
going to have all my limbs or not.
right,
What would be the array of choices that I think would be just, not knowing who I'm going to be yet? Because
right.
I would argue that the moment you know who you are, sometimes people, if they're not careful, if they don't step outside of themselves, start organizing the world in ways that benefit them and disadvantage others. And I'm
Not just
trying to
sometimes.
not,
I mean, it's very common
yeah,
because
yeah.
we're not yet to the point where we are understanding how to think. Well, what do you think could lead us? So now I'm thinking about, with that comment, I'm thinking about, and I know we have to wrap up soon, but I guess I just want to, just for a few more
Sure.
minutes, was
No worries.
wondering
I'm
if
good.
yeah, I just was wondering if we could talk about how to help a new generation of people as they're coming up learn about how complexity works, how complex adaptive systems work, and what it is like to not have that. Like, I mean, could we create a video game that's really compelling where like you don't know where you're going to be born, so you try to like at a moment in time, oh, this would be cool. At a moment in the game, you're born,
Yeah.
but you have like a bunch of levels to get to while you're arranging the world for the being born, and then you have the experience.
So, okay, I haven't ever told anyone this, but I'm going to disclose it to you. Yeah. I mean, sometimes, I mean, I'm not one of those people that falls asleep quickly. It takes a while for me to turn off my brain for some reason. But one of the things that I tell myself or talk to my head about when I'm trying to fall asleep is, if I knew the right people and I could work with them, I'd like to make a video game where the very beginning is you have passed away from this world and you're being born into another world, but you don't know who you're going to be yet.
Oh,
And then you're
God,
basically exploring it. Yes.
so cool.
And then on top of it, you're now born into another world, having passed away from this world. But on top of it, as you move through the game, not only are you're that character, but you will also be other characters in this world. At some point in time, a phase jump will happen, and you'll now be on the other side.
Right, right,
And
right. But
so,
you're also like informing the construction of this world that you're going to be
100%.
born in. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah.
exactly.
This is just what I was thinking. I don't know
Yeah,
why. It must have
and
just popped into my head because
yeah.
you've been thinking about that. But
Well, I mean, I'm kind of crazy, but I mean, I just imagine what kind of game would be like. And yes, I mean, what the goal would be is, because I mean, I know metaverse VR technologies have been hyped to a degree, but we now may actually be at a point where it may not be a perfect fidelity to walk a mile in someone else's shoes,
yeah,
but you could. And I definitely would want to have it be not only your perspective as you build the world, but then you don't know at a moment's notice that you might actually be on the other side of the equation. I mean,
yeah,
Singapore apparently does this where they have their executive branch equivalent leaders. They are intentionally rotating them every 2 or 3 years. So
yes.
you have less turf building because you never know if on the other side you might be there in 2 to 3 years from
I
now.
was just thinking the other day about a structure in which a community would just have king for a day, queen for a day, and where everyone gets a chance to be king or queen for a day. They can make edicts, etc. But there's a long period of time building up to that where we say, okay, starting in 2 years, we're going to do this. And so that people start to like
Yep.
imagine like what would they do? And then the next day, what would the impact be? Oh, do you want to meet my son? He's walking out the
If
door.
he's willing, I don't know if he wants to say hi, but I'm
Do
willing.
you want
Yes,
to say
happy to
hi
say
to
hi.
David? He's amazing.
Oh, no, you're amazing,
Would you be
Julia.
willing? Got a mask on because he's going to this conference and he's trying to protect everyone.
Hello,
And this is David Bray.
nice to meet you.
Oh, wait, now why can't I hear you? Can you speak again, David? He's, we don't know why you can't hear him.
Okay.
But in any case, that's Joseph.
Hey,
Joseph.
Julia. Can you hear me now, by the way?
I think that the recording will be able to hear you the entire time.
Okay.
It's just that when I took my headphones out, it didn't
No
properly
worries.
switch over.
Okay, so I was going to say real quick, the Greeks actually had a debate about how to actually govern. And there was actually a school of thought with the Greeks that actually just wanted to do random ballot for positions, like you said.
Yeah.
And so imagine if, and maybe this is a way we could actually get back to nonpartisan civil service, is for certain roles, you first have to indicate you're willing to do it. So it's not just forced upon you. And you put your name in a hat. I mean, maybe we even say like you have to demonstrate some knowledge of how to do trade or foreign affairs or whatever. But then you put your name in a hat and get to sit, and he's like, congrats, you're this person for the next 18 months.
Right.
And the nice thing is you don't get career politicians because you're only going to do it
That's
for
it.
18 months.
Yeah.
But it also changes the narrative from, oh, well, that's them, that's the bureaucrats, or that's the politicians, and we're
Because it's
separately.
you.
It's all of us.
Yeah.
Anyway, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we have similar falling asleep thoughts.
Yeah, exactly.
But to the end of talking about lace, I think I think it's good for humanity to think about building lace because it addresses the problems that get in the way of us having democracy with humans.
Right. Well, and I think again, it's if I was to summarize, if someone says why lace, aside from what we already talked about, the need to think about, that civilization is where you don't automatically kill the newcomer and new ideas. It's where you actually can recognize newcomers may have value and different perspectives, and that's useful. The other thing I would say, though, is how can we put in place now technology protocols in a decentralized fashion that uplifts the human spirit?
Yes. So that's the question. And
Yep.
we'll see. But that's the
We'll
question
make
we're
sense of it
constantly.
together. A diversity of ideas is welcomed, and
Yes.
hopefully this will maybe attract others to our cause together.
That's right. Join us and see what happens. It's
appreciate it as
empirical.
always, Julie. That's our goal. And thank you for being you. Thanks for everything you do. And onwards and
Thank you.
upwards.
Onwards and
Take care.
upwards.